purpose as a finance profession, as the ethical finance profession, as we're gathered here, must be to create shared sustainable prosperity for all, and in particular to play a leading role in the whole economy transition to low carbon models of production and consumption, nature-based, or positive nature-based, positive socially based models of production and consumption too. That's surely our collective purpose. And there are some people in finance who would disagree with that, but frankly they're wrong. And of course that sense of a collective purpose is why we've seen the launch and growth of many of the alliances discussed today. We've had GFANs, the UN-convened net zero alliances, the principles for responsible banking, responsible investment, sustainable insurance, and so on and so forth. And we heard from Ashok Sharma earlier about the important role private finance plays in this transition, and did play in that transition, did play at COP26. And one of the things that stuck in my mind at COP26 was Mark Carney's launch of the private finance strategy, which the objective of which, if you don't know, was that every professional financial decision should take account of climate change. So that's the Carney test which he set for us. And it follows, for me, that if every professional financial decision takes account of climate change, then surely it follows that every finance professional needs at least a reasonable knowledge and ability to apply climate change, or the principles of climate change, sustainability more broadly in the context of their role. We don't need everyone in finance to be sustainability professionals, do we? But we need everyone
I think we do.
Basic knowledge of finance. Wouldn't you want everyone to be a sustainability professional?
What is a sustainability professional? It's someone who understands what they're doing and the impact it has on the earth and on society. We need every financial professional to be able to do that.
That's a fair challenge, I think, but I would say, surely we want finance professionals to do what finance professionals do best, and that's kind of transforming unproductive sort of savings balances that aren't sitting anywhere doing anything into productive investments, in this case into the investments we need to transition to that sustainable low carbon world. So you need finance professionals who are great at finance but use a sustainability lens with that. In other words, it's not bringing people from outside of finance into transform us, it's transforming finance itself from within.
Agreed. Transforming finance itself from within. And, oh, Will, you're going to jump in already. Well, we're functioning this as a conversation, okay? So we're going to interrupt each other. That's agreed, so it's not being rude, okay? Interrupt me already. It is being a bit rude, but I'll interrupt back, and then it'll be fair. Okay.
It's very strange when you have a conversation with microphones as well, isn't it?
Is it realistic to expect that we can change the finance system? Or do we need to sort of fool the finance system into integrating sustainability?
Ooh. Now that is such an interesting question.
Because finance, Simon, you refer to finance as being about sort of, the allocation of resources, and clearly it is or should be. It's also about making money. And so we need to find ways to bring those two things together. Now, personally, I feel more optimistic about the progress of sustainable finance than I used to, because I think those two things are much more aligned than they once were. I think that people used to see sustainability perhaps as a sort of a cost activity, CSR, so a nice to have, something to keep the reputation risk down. Now I think they see it increasingly as a sort of a means to success in terms of commercial banking or investment management or insurance, because stakeholders want it, the regulators demanding it, policymakers are occasionally successfully helping us to move in the direction of sustainability. But should we be thinking about changing the way that people think? Yes. Or should we be taking the way they think and saying, that's okay, you can think that way and be a sustainable finance professional?
This is exactly the question.
Well, that's why I asked.
I'm going to answer it.
Good.
Give me a second. Okay, so the answer is yes, we have to change the way they think. But that might mean that some who think the wrong way get shuffled off. Okay?
That's going to be an easy sell.
Shuffled out. Yeah. So let me give you some context on that, right? I am deeply worried about some of the stuff I've heard today. Ask me what I'm deeply worried about.
What are you deeply worried about,
Thank you for
Sarah?
asking. I am worried about this word, metrics, measurements, data. Metrics, measurements, data. You can't fix what you can't measure. Kathy, I heard you say it.
Are you worried about it because you think
Rubbish!
it's an excuse?
You can, of course, fix what you can't measure. If my marriage is broken, which it's not, I could fix that without measuring it.
This is true.
When Wangari Maathai in Kenya said, we need to regenerate the environment here by planting trees, she didn't say, but I won't be able to fix that unless I can measure it. She just started planting trees. And by the way, the Green Belt movement, now 51 million trees. The question isn't about not being able to fix what we can't measure. It's about choosing not to fix what we can't measure. And the only way of changing that, because we're never going to get perfect measures. People are doing great work. I heard Lauren Smart, where is she, yesterday, say some really interesting things from S&P. Great work, and measurements are important, don't get me wrong. But we're never going to get perfect measures. They don't exist. In case you think they did, they don't exist.
They don't exist in finance overall, do they?
No, they don't exist anywhere.
We have things we think are perfect measures, but we usually discover every time there's a global financial crisis that they haven't actually been very good at measuring things. So this is why we have the importance of professional judgment and things like this that has to be applied,
And we need
where we are dealing with things that are fuzzy and so on. And another concept that came up yesterday that I think it was David Pitt-Watson and others were discussing in the Global Steering Group was making the point that, yes, to an extent, finance is about numbers, but we can't reduce finance to numbers. Finance is about people. It's for people, it's delivered by people, it's a human construct, and we have to approach it from that perspective as much, if not more, than think about metrics and data and so on.
But I think even human stories need numbers sometimes. So you can describe sort of going for a walk, but if you don't say, it was a 10-mile walk, nobody knows whether it's a short walk or, we do need to be, I agree about the need to humanize finance in order to explain what it is that we do and for people to care about it. But we shouldn't ignore numbers. So while I agree that we mustn't use metrics and data as an excuse for inaction or an excuse for for poor outcomes, we do, I think, need to be able to say what we're trying to do is this thing. So I'm on the board of the Impact Investing Institute, and impact investing clearly is about generating an environmental or a social return as well as a financial return. And one of the key, for me, the key defining factor of that is intentionality. So you can have a broad intentionality. You can say, I want to improve female education in a certain part of the world. But unless you say, actually, and what I would like to do is to find 20,000 people or 1 million people or 10 people, people don't know what you're trying to do. So you do sometimes need some numbers.
So here's what I want people to do when thinking about measurement. Picture yourself, some of you will be able to, some of you won't be able to, in a Catholic church confessional, okay? And say, forgive me, Father, for I have measured, okay? And then the priest says, yes, my child, but why did you measure? Why we measure is key, and I think people are flipping the reason for measurement, and measurement becomes the aim. We aim to measure rather than we aim for the outcome. And that's where this community, this is the ethical finance community, we should be the ones not talking as much about measurement, but talking about purpose and about why we do what we do. And so that's why when we come back to why do we need to change the way people think, it's because when anyone can come up with a number to say why you shouldn't do something, but we need to have people say, but I'm going to do it. So I do a lot of exec ed work with NatWest Group, Claire and Kyle, go talk to them later, they'll tell you why we're great. And the thing is, when they decided to start the exec ed work, they didn't say, because we can tell you right now that it will deliver this much return on our investment. They said, we've committed to climate, this is the way we're going to get there. We're actually not sure what we're going to do, but it's the right thing to do. And by the right thing to do, I don't mean ethically or morally, it might be, but it's the right thing to do for the purpose we've just announced. So whenever I hear a company say, we've announced our purpose-led strategy and we've measured all of these things about it, I get worried because I think that they've done it because they're comfortable pointing to the measurements.
So I agree with a lot of that, but I am troubled by this idea that there's only one right way to think. I think that is worrisome in the broader context of ethical finance. There's probably a lot of agreement about the way we think within this room. But to go back to kind of the original challenge, to me, I don't think it matters too much whether you believe in sustainable finance for what we probably all think are the right reasons, or because you think it's a great way to make money. It should be both, to your point, Will. But if we can combine the two, if we combine both that moral imperative and the commercial opportunity, then I think that's how we really create an unstoppable force for change. And actually, it would be great if everyone's doing it for the right reasons, but I just don't think the world's like that.
And I'm
Will?
afraid I agree. I think that's really important not to overemphasize purpose, because it makes all of this sound sort of special and different. And actually, we don't want it to be special and different. We want this just to be finance. We want all finance professionals to sort of just incorporate sustainability considerations as part of their standard skill sets. But the skill set I think we're talking about is the sort of the mindset. And that I think is quite interesting. And Simon, you talked about judgment. And I think we do need to sort of to reintroduce judgment into the process, because I think there was a session yesterday, and I can't remember, David, I think you were talking, or he may not be here still, but he was talking about the need for humanizing finance. And then at dinner last night, one of our, I won't name him, but anyhow, was talking about the fact that that's actually quite difficult because there are a lot of finance processes and there's a lot of regulation. And there's
the regulators hate judgment. Regulators do not like judgment at all, do they?
No, they don't, which is a shame, because actually we do need it, because I think otherwise we are exclusively in a world of measures, and I'd be in your confessional. And I think we do need measures. We need measures to demonstrate outcomes so that we can tell stories and so that we can build confidence and help people explain why we're doing what we're doing.
This wasn't scripted, but Will has just said something exactly that I wrote down earlier, Will. So that makes it right.
Do I win anything?
Yeah, you
or
do.
Not?
Yeah,
oh, good.
Yeah. But which is, why do we... Someone spoke about... it was James from Phoenix spoke about needing a narrative for our customers. But why does the narrative need measures? In part because of a lack of trust. Because we don't really trust that the financial services industry are actually trying to change the world or for the better, and not just screw us out of all our money so that the CEOs can make millions. So because there's lack of trust, the measures are the way that we say, but we can prove it. If we developed more trust, as we hopefully will do as a financial services industry, would we need as many measures, or would the narratives work better? Because people trust that they're true.
I think that's a very fair challenge, and clearly, in the global financial crisis, we demonstrated as a finance profession that, or we lost the confidence and trust of the public, and we can't win that back. It has to be bestowed on us by the public in our countries and the world as a whole when we prove that finance is genuinely aligned to social purpose, which is clearly beyond climate and beyond nature and beyond the sort of the S factors as well we've been talking about today. What does this mean in practice for us, though? Because it's lovely having a bit of a conversation, even a mild argument by the standards of a conference about which is great. We should have more arguments at conferences and things, I think. What does that mean in practice? You mentioned the program you're doing at NatWest. Will, sort of Casey talked about the very successful ESG work that's been led by CFA Society of the UK and very much yourself, I know. So how are you getting everybody in NatWest to think the way you want them to think?
Yeah, it's a dictatorial regime. So a couple of things, and I'll give you some secrets. Don't tell NatWest Group this, okay? So when we started the program, it was mid-COVID. There were kids running around everyone's studies. We were really hard. We couldn't sit together to design the program, either with NatWest Group or with my team. And so we had to kind of throw stuff together, right, a little bit. And one of the things that we had to do was create a program that would work for people who were both finance-y people and non-finance-y, non-banky people, like customer relationship managers or even branch people who really didn't have, or marketing teams. And so we needed some non-finance-y content. We had all our climate finance lecturers doing the stuff that you guys want. But we needed non-finance-y content, so I made some up. Don't worry, I do teach stuff, so I used that. But it was on persuasion, Aristotle, ethos, pathos, logos, using persuasive techniques. On how do you have confident climate conversations when you don't have all the answers or any of the answers? On how do you cope with circles of control, influence, and concern, a little bit of Stephen Covey there for people who know it. And those sessions were by far the most popular. And what we realised from this program was that it wasn't a technical mindset that people needed per se. They did need technical stuff from us, climate financy stuff. What they needed was a mindset shift and permission and agency. And of course, they got that because of the leadership. Someone mentioned leadership earlier, enlightened leadership. They got that because of the leadership. So what I'm asking of CFA Institute, Chartered Bankers Institute, is how do you help with that sense of permission and agency to act? Not just, I've done the CFA ESG certificate, which everyone should do, but once I've got it, how do I act on it within an organisation, perhaps that doesn't have that enlightened leadership?
Yeah, it's a really good question because we're not doing it yet. Because we started on technical skills. So we started with the ESG certificate. We now have the climate certificate. We're launching an impact certificate early next year. But those aren't designed to bring people up to speed on what is this, how does it work, how can you talk to a client about it. You should know enough that you can challenge other people when they're talking to you about it and so on. That's great, but it doesn't solve the problem, as you've identified. And I think that getting that, we have an ethical leadership program that we run each year, and we get 20 senior people from executive teams around investment management firms to attend that. And we do some of that in there. And what we're thinking about is how do we industrialize that a little bit? How do we make it, because it's a 3-day course, and these people are very time poor, and it's expensive. And how can we do something that is sort of, I don't know, much shorter in person, but then maybe has a little bit of virtual, and bring that to people. But the other bit that I'm concerned about, actually, because the behavioral is really important, but the other thing that is that this is a systemic problem. And we aren't educating people yet about working within a system, because what we're doing is building people's skills within their own organizations. So we're helping people to be better at being good at climate, being good at ESG, being good at impact within their own firm. But how do we get people to be really good at going into the alliances? How do we get people to be really good at working with the regulator? How do we enable firms to have a set of people who are really good at putting together policy responses? And how do we do that in a way that we then allow people to collaborate? And I know that's terribly dangerous because the regulator doesn't like organizations to collaborate with one another. But how can we build those sort of collaborative systemic skills? And we don't know the answers yet. So if there are people out there who think you do know the answer, and grab me afterwards because I'd love to talk to you about this, because I think it's a gap. Like the behavioral gap, I think sort of working within a system is not something that we have yet, as a sector, been very good at helping people to do.
I think you're being overly modest. I think you probably do know some of the answers, and it's just because you haven't scripted this, you haven't had time to think about them yet, really. But because
I'm not sure I do.
Well, surely the people have this view of professional bodies that we provide qualifications and certificates, and that's part of what we do. But that's part of what we deliver in terms of a greater purpose. What we're trying to do with professional bodies, whether that's in finance or we see this in other professions, the medical profession, the teaching profession, the accountancy profession, and so on, is to establish the professional norms for your sector. So, and those are the professional norms, those are the pillars on which culture rests. And that's a culture that goes beyond your organization. It's the culture of banking, in our case, or the culture of investment, or the culture of teaching, and so on. And so our role as professional bodies, it seems to me, is to build and to try and do it at scale. So there is that challenge of how do we scale it up to build the capacity, the capability, and capacity and capability support that sort of new, refreshed culture, which should be aligned with that collective purpose. And if the collective purpose is, as Mark Carney says, to ensure that every professional financial decision should take account of climate change, and you think of the urgency and the scale of the collective action behind these alliances like GFANZ, we need to have that same sense of collective urgency about upskilling and reskilling millions of finance professionals everywhere. Because if we're not going to measure, we need to act, and it with finance professionals who do that.
But you've just answered the first question and proved me right again, which is just going really well. We need to upskill millions of financial professionals. All of them need to be conversant in climate change. And by the way, nature, just transitions, the big S questions, which is not my area of expertise, but is such an important part of this. But I wanted to come back to that issue of the upskilling. Yes, we need to upskill, but I don't love the word skill, because a skill is often not linked to thinking, to change the way we think. So we would argue that there's skills and there's education, and there's seeing the world differently. So when we come in to do exec ed, or even when we teach our students, our aim isn't to upskill people, it's to give them a different lens to see the world. And I've been accused, give me a second because I've got a great analogy coming. I've been accused of over-analogizing my speeches, but here's a good one. If we start by giving people the lens with a pair of spectacles that they can take off, at least they've got them. Then I want them to use that lens as a contact lens, so it really stays in a lot longer, although eventually it does come out. And then they're going to have laser eye surgery, right? And they're never going to see the world differently. They're never going to see their profession, the finance profession, the banking profession, the accounting profession, differently from the idea that we are here to help society thrive, not just to make money.
Can I take your analogy and take it even further, please? I want finance professionals to have X-ray specs, Sarah, so they can look inside the profession, inside their organisations, and make change happen, that sense of entrepreneurship.
I've never been able to wear contacts, so clearly I'm in a good deal of trouble here. Leadership on this. How can this room become effective leaders within their own organisations, their own networks, to help change the way finance professionals think? Because this room probably thinks that way already. But how can we and how can this room lead on that?
So can I ask a question of the audience? Put your hand up if you are 30 years or younger. 30 years or younger. Simon. Everyone knows you're 32. 30 years or younger, okay? So I've met a few 30 years or younger people. I'm making a prediction today. Put your hands up again. Okay, put your hands up again. Turn around and look at these people, okay? The leaders of tomorrow aren't the old people like us. I know. They are the young people who've just put their hand up. I've met Pippi, I've met Scott, I've met Erin. I'd love to meet more of you. The fact is that sometimes too many of these conversations happen in the boardrooms where the young people aren't sitting, and we need to speak to the young people in our organisations. The most I ever learn, and I include every lecture I've ever had, is from the students I teach. Easily, by a factor of 100, right? And so I think that professional bodies, I would challenge you to engage more with young people, not just on the stuff they have to learn, and I get they have to learn the stuff, I understand, but on the way in which they can use their power. And by the way, everyone who put up your hand, you have so much more power than you realise or than you're currently using to change from within and from below. And actually, everyone we've heard speak, to pick out a few, Eva, I could name all of them. I guarantee you, and they will tell you, that a lot of what they're speaking about is on the shoulders of the work done by our young analysts. And if we have our young analysts, young bankers, young accountants, young actuarial people, actuaries, doing this work from that perspective with that lens, then suddenly we get more and more impetus, excitement. I want people to smile leaving this conference, not frown. I want people to say, we can do it. It's hard, it's awful, but we can do it. Yeah. So how are we going to get that sort of leadership?
I think conclusion is incredibly important. Sort of being an open leader and asking, so we have lots of young people who are going to be the future leaders, but we've also got a lot of leaders in here already.
So what should they do?
I think they should be asking questions of their stakeholders, of the people that they work with, being very open about their own lack of understanding about some of this stuff, their own the questions that they have about how does this work, because that is, I think, in terms of ethics, one of the things that worries me is sometimes when we are keen to promote sustainable finance, we don't look hard at ourselves and say, actually, some of this doesn't really work. But let's not talk about that, because it's so important that we persuade people that it does work, that we can't talk about the bits that don't really work. And so we need to be a little bit more open, and I think leaders need to be really open and engage with stakeholders and say, how should we take this forward? Because the best ideas are always out there. So like your students, we've got 12,000 members. When we need to know something, we just go and ask the membership. And we crowdsource that information.
Do you get the voices you need, and how can you get more of those?
The voices you need are sometimes hard to find, because you have people who will put themselves forward straight away, and you need to go to the next layer down, the ones who actually are quietly sitting there in the back, and say, actually, what do you think? So there is some work to do in that. But I think as a leader, if you demonstrate your own humanity and say, I don't know what's going on here, I need help, people will respond as humans to you. So I think that's what I would sort of single step that I would recommend, is being honest and open and being very inclusive and asking the people that you work with, you represent, that you have as customers, how should we proceed?
When we talk about what we're talking about is critical thinking, okay? And critical thinking, I've written a book, you can find it, it's excellent. Critical thinking, I wrote it for my undergrad students because I started teaching first-year undergraduates, 17, 18, 19. And when I started teaching them, I'm like, they're going to love me, it's going to be great. Because I was used to postgrads, and it was a bit of a disaster. And I realised why. They hadn't been given permission to think, and they hadn't been taught how to think, and that's why I wrote the book. And once you do, I'll tell you a story about a guy called Jack. Jack had to write a reflective essay for me, and in it he wrote, everyone did, not just Jack, and in it Jack wrote that, I don't remember this, but it happened apparently, that I was the first person he remembers who ever said to him, "What do you think, Jack?" He would have been 18 years old, first year of university. How often are we saying, what do you think? And how often are leaders saying, we don't have the answers, we don't have perfect metrics. Here are what the metrics can do. What do you think about what they can't do, and what decision should we make anyway? Simon, how do we...
Well,
with 11 seconds to go.
Exactly. I haven't got in 11 seconds. I haven't got the answers. So I think that's a fantastic place to be leaving it.
Should we do our one last thing? The thing we should recommend. I can hold Casey off. I promise.
We are. I'm getting looks from over there. So we can't. Yes.
I can't see her.
Anyway. So we have managed to answer precisely none of your questions, but we hope we managed to sort of entertain you and make you think, not necessarily think in the same way that Sarah would have us all think, but if you all think in a slightly different way, that would be great. We also touched on the question of how do we get the finance profession as a whole to be thinking, engaging with these things, and so my colleagues have been working on something called the Principles for Responsible Banking Academy to support the UN Principles for Responsible Banking, and as we leave the stage, a short video will play, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The triple planetary crisis of climate change, nature and biodiversity loss, and pollution underpins the urgency and importance of international collaboration across all strands of society. Banks have a unique and critical role to play in pivoting the global economic system to redirect capital and accelerate the pace and scale of positive change across entire economies. In order to see meaningful changes at the heart of organizations, every single bank employee needs to consider responsible and sustainable practices in their day-to-day decision-making. From understanding more responsible lending practices to learning how to work with their customers to help them green their businesses and offer sustainable products, banks and their employees are embarking on a journey of unprecedented scale. Therefore, we are delighted to introduce the Principles for Responsible Banking Academy, a unique online learning program designed for banking professionals all over the world. The Academy brings together the United Nations, the world's most established professional banking institute, and one of the largest organizations for international development cooperation worldwide. All of which, thanks to their many years of experience, are at the forefront of sustainable finance. Through education and training, the Academy will support banks in the global sector to align their professional practices with the UN Principles for Responsible Banking, the world's foremost framework for ensuring that bank strategy and practice align with the vision society has set out for its future in the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. The Academy will create a global network of responsible bankers, mainstreaming responsible banking and sustainable finance through capacity, capability, and culture. This leading-edge educational program is the first of its kind, having been designed by industry experts in consultation with banks worldwide. The training program and examinations can be completed entirely online, making it widely accessible to professionals worldwide. The curriculum is suitable for individuals at all stages of learning, whether beginners, advanced, or at executive and board level. We believe that through the learning opportunities offered in our unique curriculum, we can support the banking sector's transition toward a better future, one which is aligned with better practices, better decision-making, and has a better impact on the world. If you want to be part of the change and register your interest in the Academy, please visit our website at www.prbacademy.com.